We now take you live to Washington, where the International Monetary Fund is presenting its April 2025 World Economic Outlook. Amid rising global uncertainty, IMF chief economist Pierre-Olivier Gutierrez is set to unveil the latest growth projections and offer key insights into the state of the global economy. Let's join the press briefing.
Even if some highly tariffed countries could benefit. Now, while global growth remains well above recession levels, all regions are negatively impacted this year and next. And the global disinflation process continues, but at a slower pace, with inflation revised up by 0.1 percentage point in both years. These trade tensions will greatly impact global trade. We project that global trade growth will be more than cut in half, from 3.8% last year to 1.7% this year. The tariffs will play out differently in different countries. For the United States, the tariffs represent a supply shock that reduces productivity and output permanently and increases price pressures temporarily. This adds to an already weakening outlook and leads us to revise growth down by 0.9 percentage point to 1.8%, with a 0.4 percentage point downgrade from the tariffs only, while inflation is revised upwards. For trading partners, tariffs act mostly as a negative external demand shock, weakening activity and prices, even if some countries could benefit from trade diversion. This is why we have lowered our China growth forecast this year to 4%, while inflation is revised down by 0.8 percentage point, increasing deflationary pressures. All countries are negatively affected by the surge in trade policy uncertainty as businesses cut purchases and investment while financial institutions reassess their borrowers' exposure. Uncertainty also increases because of the complex sectoral disruptions that tariffs could cause up and down supply chains, as we saw during the pandemic. The effect of these shocks on exchange rates is complex. The tariffs could appreciate the US dollar, as in previous episodes. However, greater policy uncertainty, lower US growth prospects, and an adjustment in the global demand for dollar assets are weighing down on the dollar. Risks to the global economy have increased and are firmly to the downside. First, while we are not projecting a global downturn, the risk it may happen this year have increased substantially, from 17% projected back in October to 30% now. An escalation of trade tensions would further depress growth. Financial conditions could also tighten as markets react negatively to diminished growth prospects and increased uncertainty. On the flip side, growth prospects could immediately improve if countries ease from their current trade policy stance and promote a new, clear, and stable trade environment. Addressing domestic imbalances can also help raise growth while contributing significantly to closing external imbalances. For Europe, this means spending more on public infrastructure to accelerate productivity growth. For China, it means boosting support for domestic demand, while for the US, it means stepping up fiscal consolidation. Turning to policies, our recommendations call for prudence and improved collaboration. Let me outline some key ones. First, an obvious priority is to restore trade policy stability. The global economy needs a clear, stable, and predictable trading environment, one that addresses some of the long-standing gaps in international trading rules. Monetary policy will need to remain agile and respond by tightening where inflation pressures re-emerge while easing where weak demand dominates. Monetary policy credibility will be key, especially where inflation expectations might de-anchor, and central bank independence remains a cornerstone. Many fiscal authorities will face new spending needs to bolster defense spending or to offset the trade dislocations likely to come. Some of the poorest countries, also hit with reduced official aid, could experience that distress. Yet debt levels are still elevated, and most countries still need to rebuild fiscal space, including by implementing structural reforms. Support, where needed, should remain narrowly targeted and temporary. It is easier to turn on the fiscal tap than to turn it off. Where new spending needs are permanent, as for defense spending in some countries, planning for offsetting cuts elsewhere or new revenues should be made. Finally, even if some of the grievances against our trading system have merit, we should all work towards fixing the system so that it can deliver better opportunities to all. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre-Olivier. Before we open the floor to your questions, some ground rules. First of all, if you want to ask a question, raise your hand. If I call on you, please identify yourself and the media you represent. Try to be succinct, stick to one question. We want to answer as many questions as possible. And also a reminder, we are here to discuss the World Economic Outlook. Those questions regarding country programs, institutional issues are going to be better placed for the regional press briefings that are happening later this week, and also the managing director's press briefing this Thursday. With that said, I want hands up. Okay, so I'm gonna start here in the center. Then I'm gonna move the room to my left, then to my right. I'm gonna start the lady with the green jacket there.
Thank you. Hi, Andrea Shalal with Reuters. Thanks so much for doing this. Pierre-Olivier, I wonder if you can speak a little bit to the fact that you haven't called out a recession. And, you know, we are hearing lots of economists in the United States and other places. Most recently, yesterday, the IIF is now also forecasting a small recession in the second half of the year. What we see in the WEO is that the percentage of risk of a recession has increased pretty dramatically. Can you walk us through why you are not at this point calling a recession, for instance, likely in the United States, and what it would take to tip it that way? Thanks.
Thank you, Andrea. So for the United States, we are projecting a significant slowdown. We're projecting growth will be at 1.8% in 2025, and that's a 0.9 percentage point slowdown revision in our projections from January. But 1.9% is obviously not a recession. And the reason for this is that we have a U.S. economy that, in our view, is coming from a position of strength. We had an economy that was growing very rapidly. We have a labor market that is still very robust. We've seen some signs of weakening and slowdown in the U.S. economy even before the tariff announcements. So in fact, the 0.9 percentage point downward revision that I just mentioned, only a part of this, maybe 0.4 percentage point, is coming from the tariffs. Some of that is also coming from weakening momentum. This was an economy that was doing very, very well, but was self-correcting and cooling off a bit on its own. And we were seeing already consumption numbers coming down. We're seeing consumer confidence coming down. So all of that was already factored in. But we're not seeing a recession in our reference forecast. As you mentioned, Andrea, we are when we do our risk assessment, if you want, we are seeing the probability of a recession increasing from about 25% back in October to around 40% when we assess it now.
Okay, I'm going to move to this side, the lady here in red.
Good morning. It's Noor Amashi from Asharq Bloomberg. Pierre, I wanted to ask you about the downward pressure on the dollar now. To what extent do you believe it can provide some some relief from the pressure on highly indebted emerging economies with a large share of dollar-denominated debt? And has this downward pressure on the dollar changed your outlook on all of those emerging economies that are still under the impact of the high debt, as mentioned by the MD in previous meetings, where this high debt is really one of the impediments to growth? Thanks.
Yeah, so we're seeing a weakening of the dollar that is fairly broad-based over the last few weeks. As I mentioned in my opening remarks, some of that is coming from the weaker growth prospects in the U.S. Some of it is coming from the increased uncertainty, and it's leading to a reassessment of the global demand for dollar assets. when we step back, we also have to realize we're coming from a position where over the last few years, there have been tremendous capital inflows into US markets, in particular risk markets. And that's something that, of course, my colleague Tobias Adrian will talk about in the GFSR press conference. So we are seeing some adjustment, some correction. The markets are handling it. We don't see signs of stress, even in currency markets. Now, the interesting development is what does it mean for emerging markets? And you're right to point out that in the past, when dollar would strengthen, that would not necessarily be a good news for emerging markets because they have dollar-denominated debts, so that increases their liabilities and the pressure on them to service those debts, and that can lead to some tightening of financial conditions. So we are not seeing that right now.
The April 2025 World Economic Outlook projects global growth to decline to 2.8% in 2025 amidst escalating trade tensions and policy uncertainty. The outlook says we're entering a new era while global growth remains well above recession levels. All regions are negatively impacted this year and next, and the global disinflation process continues.